Hi there. It's August the 12th, and we continue our passage through the book of Nehemiah in Hebrew, and we are reading from chapter 3:15 through to chapter 5, verse 13. And in these chapters, we're continuing to see the rebuilding of Jerusalem. We left the story off in our previous reading in the middle of the rebuilding, and the rest of chapter 3 continues around the walls, saying who's rebuilding what, who's doing what work. And there are some people like the Tekoites who even do two lots of work, and we also see the priests are involved, and the netinim, who are the servants of the priests as well. Everyone is getting involved. No one is absenting themselves from the work. And in chapter 3, the description of the rebuilding goes all the way around the city, so that the ending is just as it comes up to the sheep gate, which is where the rebuilding began at the beginning of the chapter with the priest rebuilding the sheep gate. So it's gone all the way around the city. Now, chapter 3 in the Hebrew version of the scriptures continues with the next little part, which begins our chapter 4 in the English version, because we're following the Septuagint, following the Greek version. But the Hebrew Bible continues chapter 3 to the point to take in the fact that the Jews were facing the onslaught of the criticism of Sanballat and Tobiah. And Sanballat and Tobiah are criticizing them for what they're doing, and they're saying that your work is dreadful, it's terrible work, you're building with rubbish, nothing's really being achieved here. In fact, says Tobiah, if a fox walked up on your wall, it would fall down. There's no substance to it. Well, basically, they're getting really annoyed, really angry. In fact, they see, even despite their attacks, verbal attacks, that the Jews are continuing the work and they're redoubling their efforts. So later in chapter 4, the beginning of chapter 4 in the Hebrew version and chapter 4:7 in our version, Sanballat and Tobiah organize, and the Arabs organize, and the Ashdodites, the Philistines, they organize to actually attack the Jews. And so the opposition goes up a notch. But Nehemiah and the Jews pray. It's interesting, the first thing they do is they pray. They bring this whole situation to God in prayer, and then they set watch, and they set protection. They give people swords and spears, and they set them alongside those who are building. So there are some who are building, and there are some who are protecting and watching, and in this way they overcome their enemies, and in this way they're able to complete to get a long way in completion of the building of the wall. But it's a very difficult situation, a very threatening situation that they're working under. And then in chapter 5 we read of another issue which has arisen, which is causing a lot of distress as well. And that is this: we find, don't we, that in situations where people are in great distress and great need, and there are great issues, that some people are willing to make a profit out of that. There's always those whose hearts are hard enough and evil enough to make a profit out of other people's distress. And we find here that there are Jews who are oppressing their fellow Jews by making them borrow money and pay and mortgage their lands and mortgage their vineyards in order to pay them for corn. But not only that, but also to raise enough money to pay the taxes that are due to the king. And so there are Jews who are loaning money at interest to other Jews, taking their lands from them, and even taking their children, because of course in those times if you couldn't pay a debt you were enslaved, and so their children are being enslaved. And Nehemiah he's horrified at hearing this. And it says, I searched my heart. It said he had a real deep think about this. And he comes back to the people and he says, look, we have sought to redeem. We've sought there to be redemption. We've seen people redeemed from exile. And now you're trying to put them back into slavery by loaning to them a usury. He says, let's stop this. Let's forbid this. And there is a general assent to Nehemiah's suggestion that they should no longer oppress one another with this kind of usury and this kind of loaning at high interest. And the priests are brought in actually to witness a vow that is taken that they will no longer do this. One thing we see here in this section of Nehemiah is the amazing sense of community, the amazing sense of relationship, the working together and for one another that is there in the heart of the people. We also see how destructive selfish motives can be, and Nehemiah is overriding that with this desire to see them as one, to see them work together as one. God's heart is always to see love in action. God's heart is always to see us to bless one another and not to take from one another. And that's demonstrated very clearly in this section of Nehemiah today. Have a very good August the 12th.